In late 2019, a Christian film was made set in a dystopian present where American society collapses in wake of massive violent protests that the government is unable or unwilling to handle. And I thought this could either be on the nose or ahead of its time. The Reliant is about the collapse of the US dollar, but the details of the situation are left intentionally vague, as the story follows one family's efforts to survive. I will not spoil this movie, but this movie is like a cross between Red Dawn and M. Night Shyamalan's Signs. Red Dawn explores moral issues surrounding war, which I will talk about later, while Signs explores God's providence. The story begins with a man bringing his daughter Faith into a hospital as she has been injured. Kevin Sorbo is the doctor working while his wife is in labor. Sensing that the man is inebriated, which caused the apparent car accident Faith was in, he calls security on the father and the situation escalates. It would turn out that the man would never see his daughter again. The story fast forwards 7 years, and we are celebrating Kevin Sorbo's eldest son Jimmy's birthday. His eldest daughter Sophie is triggered that Kevin Sorbo has given Jimmy a rifle, alluding to the death of Jimmy's twin sister. Sophie is engaged to Adam and is supposed to get married in a little over a month. Anarchy breaks out very early in the film. The characters assumed that they would have more time before the violence in the cities comes to their neighborhood. And when chaos erupts, the man in the beginning of the film who lost his daughter would use this as an opportunity to take revenge on Kevin Sorbo and his family. So he recruits his buddies and shows up at their house, and the family is forced to flee into the woods. From there, they wrestle with the feeling of abandonment by God, the appropriate use of force as Christians, forgiveness, and how no one is too far gone for God. These are interesting ideas to tackle in a story, but how the Reliant does so is a bit of a mixed bag. On the issue of self-defense, we start out with a Christian family that partakes in the Second Amendment and prepares for the worst. Sophie uses John Piper's argument that Christians cannot use lethal force in self-defense, and the movie's messaging is that there are justified uses of lethal force. However, the movie faces a similar situation to Red Dawn, where the main characters deliberate over executing someone they've captured that's committed murder. The messaging of the movie is rather confusing. On one hand, using force in self-defense is justified, but the movie seems to argue that executing murderers is not, even though the characters make a practical self-defense argument in favor of execution. The message that I gather is that the Reliant is trying to say that we do not have the authority to execute murderers in wake of societal collapse, and that people can change no matter what they've done, so execution is not just. Contrast this with Red Dawn that shows us we must carry out swift justice no matter how difficult.
Because we live here. Don't shoot you. Don't shoot you. Don't shoot you.
The Reliant does well to argue against John Piper's self-defense theology, but does not formulate a coherent view on the use of lethal force by Christians. In tackling Christian teachings about forgiveness, the Reliant does well to maintain orthodoxy, and we see characters apply Christian teaching on forgiveness under extreme circumstances with each other and with the villains that are after them. And perhaps it speaks more about Christian films as a genre, but they do a classic conversion at the end, and I must wonder, are Christian movies like romance movies where audiences have this expectation? What this movie does well is it has decent fight sequences that are thrilling. Comparable secular movies like The Purge have awful action scenes because the viewer cannot see them. So I would say that the action sequences are the best thing about this movie. It is thrilling and entertaining, Like, some of the characters are pulling off Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and stuff, and I'm here for that. But when the intensity slows down, the characters argue about faith, and these parts get especially cringy. The sisters quote only well-known Bible verses in their dialogue like fortune cookies, but I think this might have been intentionally cringy, because the script does not make these arguments come off as convincing. Instead, applying Christian teaching in action is ultimately what drives character development in this film. My biggest problems with this movie were the writing and the production. It's hard to take a movie seriously when the girls all have their makeup done and the men are all clean shaven. This film did not have the ambition to correct that, despite its willingness to venture out into rarely traveled territory for Christian movies. The cast of this film is incredibly small and unrealistic. The rule that implied death is no death at all is followed to a T, and no explanation is provided as to how characters survive after we last see them in the hands of their captors. That being said, the film does provide an element of uncertainty, as not all of the protagonists survive, but it undermines itself in this regard. The movie's ending is a mix between Signs and Cormac McCarthy's The Road. The Reliant was a risky attempt to bring more action into faith-based films, but I do not think it was a good movie by its own merit. And unfortunately, this movie does not have the luxury of being a shiny object that causes people to turn their brains off to its numerous flaws. However, I do hope that this film does have a lasting impact, as it's preferable to watching War Room or Courageous. This is the direction I think Christian film should go in. However, I think that certain expectations of the genre should be left behind. The Reliant was entertaining but deeply flawed on various fronts.